Hello, and welcome to Making Sense of It. This program is our gift to you from the William Glasser Institute for Choice Theory. And each week we have a faculty member to tell us about how they have taken choice theory, reality therapy, and lead management and use it in their own individual lives. I am Mona Duncan, your moderator, and it's a delight to have you here. We have the speaker to speak, and then after we turn off, then Ron and I will talk back and forth for a few minutes. And then whenever we turn off the airways, those of you that are here live will have an opportunity to ask questions or make comments. So our speaker today is Ron Mottern, and he is speaking today on looking at choice theory and our basic need for survival and how trauma and maybe hypnosis, does it make a change to it? Does it interfere with? So welcome everyone. And Ron, it's a delight to have you here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So you can take it away anytime.
Okay. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Sometimes there's a little lag between what I'm sharing and what's here, but it looks to be pretty good today. Okay, so what we want to look at is that basic need of survival, which I think is something that we sort of neglect in choice theory and reality therapy. We focus more on psychological needs, which is mainly what we practice on, but I think there's something to be gained from looking at that survival need. And then I want to look at a second reflexive loop that's connected to the sensory filter. Now, this is something that I'm proposing here. So questions that you have are certainly welcome. I haven't worked all this out myself, so I was looking forward to presenting that here so we could look at that. So the first thing I want you to just to recall is that brain is a control system, okay? Because I think we're going to hit just about all parts of it in the next 20 minutes. So if you would just keep that in mind. And what we're going to look at is we're going to look at those loops and filters to begin with. The first reflexive loop, which we know that exists and which we work with most of all. And then that second reflexive loop, which is connected to the survival need. I want to look at creative total behaviors. And these come up as mind-body issues, things like post-traumatic stress disorder, things like non-epileptic seizures, CRPS, these sorts of mind-body issues that we really don't have a handle on physiologically how they occur, but they do occur. Want to look at the comparing place. What I'm calling that is neuroception. We'll talk about that more. And then how to access that black box of the mind. That black box of the mind, of course, being the creative place that we talk about. And some ways that we can do that and ways that we can deal with PTSD as we use that. So let me jump right in because, like I said, we have a long way to go and a short time to get there. So that first reflexive loop that I want to call your attention to, excuse me, exists between the value filter, which is part of the perceptual filters, right? We have the total knowledge filter, we have the value filter, those are the perceptual filters. And then between that and the quality world, those psychological needs that get into our quality world, okay? Outside, we have big R reality, which we may never know because it has to be filtered before we know it. But once it gets through, whatever it is that gets through, goes through that total knowledge filter. If it meets our needs, it goes through the value filter, ends up in our quality world. And we know there's a reflexive loop there. The loop is reflexive because the things that are in the quality world will affect what gets through the value filter, which affects what gets in the quality world. Because one of the things in the quality world is our belief system, the way things should be, the way things ought to be, the way things must be for us. And those affect what actually make it through the value filter itself. So the loop is reflexive. We know this because Thomas Kuhn wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions back in the 60s. And he was able to prove this, okay? He does a little experiment in there. We proved this experimentally. And it's recreated, that little experiment he did with some cards, it's a card exercise, is recreated in Joel Barker's film, his video called The Business of Paradigms. Now I've included a link there to that. so that you can go back later. It's the card exercises in about the first 10 minutes of the video. But I think you'll enjoy looking at the entire thing. It's an old one. It's 1989. He has a newer version of that, but the one I'm sending you is free. Otherwise, we'd have to pay like $400 for it. So go to the thing, watch that, and what we see is that indeed between those pictures in the quality world, our belief system, the way things are supposed to be, and that value filter, there is indeed a reflexive loop. Now we know that once again because Kuhn showed and other people have showed since then that if something is contrary to our belief system, then we'll do one of three things. We will either ignore that information, so it gets into the total knowledge filter, but it doesn't get into the value filter. We will twist that information until it fits what's in our belief system, or in some cases, physiologically, we will become incapable of seeing what that data is. And the card exercise shows you that, so I throw that in there for your edification. And like I said, we know that loop exists. We know that loop exists between that quality world and the value filter and how each affects the other. Now, what I'm suggesting is that there's another reflexive loop. There's a reflexive loop between the sensory filter and the survival need. So once again, outside we have big R reality, and the only way we know that, the only way we know that reality, which is our little r reality, right, is by what makes it through first, that sensory filter. And then it goes through the perceptual filters and then gets into our quality world, that little r reality. We don't talk a whole lot about the survival need in choice theory. Glasser, in my experience, has always just sort of said, the survival need in our society is pretty much met. We have institutions that do that. And so we focus on the psychological needs, which as practitioners, that's where most of our stuff is. But I think some very important stuff is connected to the survival need through a second reflexive loop to the sensory filter. So that survival need is kicked on, the pictures we have there. Oftentimes when we talk about the quality world, we talk about wants, right? The wants are reflexive or reflections of the needs. So we talk about that, and we get to something like PTSD or non-epileptic seizures or any of these other things, and people say, well, I don't want those things. Why are those in my quality world? Why do these things keep coming up? Well, I don't want that. Well, we don't want it on a psychological basis, but it helped us to survive in some way. So the brain thinks, I'll get to that in a minute, but it fulfills the survival need for us. So that's how it gets in there. So we have that survival need. I'm saying there's a reflexive loop between the sensory filter and that survival need that's in the quality world. And that's what creates these issues that we have, things like phantom limb pain. Of all of these, we probably know more about that one. Things like chronic regional pain syndrome. Somebody has a scratch on their hand, right? They're going in their home, they scratch it on a rose bush or something. The next morning, their arm is swelled up 3 times its normal size. It's bright red with inflammation, and it causes intense pain if somebody even breathes on it, okay? Same thing sort of for post-traumatic stress disorder, right? We have all this anxiety going on. PTSD is an anxiety disorder. So we have all of this intense anxiety going on for something we experience. Non-epileptic seizures are the same. We have 2 kinds of seizures, epileptic or non-epileptic. The non-epileptic seizures are either psychogenic or physiologic. And I've worked with both of those. I'm working with the physiologic now. I've worked with the psychogenic in the past. But these are sort of tied, I believe, to this second reflexive loop and the survival filter where the brain just makes a mistake about this stuff, okay? So, excuse me, what we have is that in the creating place, okay, that black box of the mind, okay, we know that total behaviors are created there, but in these cases, they're created in response to a mistake. The brain simply makes a mistake, and we know that the brain can do that, and it attributes survival, our survival, to a physiological response that was associated with the original trauma. So for example, for non-epileptic seizures, the one I'm working with now, the client has went through a trauma, and the trauma was her electrolytes were depleted, Her potassium was depleted down to life-threatening levels, and she started having seizures associated with that. Then they got her electrolytes back up to where they should be. The potassium's up. They always check that. She's on continual checking of that, but she continues to have the seizures, okay? So what we're saying is this response, okay, whether it's anxietying in PTSD, whether it is seizuring in non-epileptic seizures, that response was perceived as fulfilling the survival need. And that's how it got to be a picture in the quality world. And that's just a mistake. It's a mistake that the brain has made. So from now on, whenever the body experiences any kind of sensation that's similar to that original trauma, and this is usually via neuroception, and neuroception, we'll talk about that a little bit more as the comparing place, but neuroception is just a continual body scan. The body is always scanning what is going on inside of it, and with neuroception, maybe a little outside of it as well. But as we experience these things that the body senses and then says, whoa, whoa, something's wrong, that's the comparing place, right? A scale's a little out of balance here. Then what the mind body does is it recreates that physiological response that helped us to survive. The anxietying, once again, in PTS, seizuring in non-epileptic seizures. The sensations, any kind of sensation we get is perceived and processed first in the tactile sensory system. So, the more we look at the brain as a control system and that sensory filter being first, it's our first thing there before, outside we have the big R and then we have the sensory filter. The more we look at the model, the more we learn about the body and the way the body works and things like that in the mind and what have you. It's a testament to Dr. Glasser that, empowers that system works exactly like it does. But anyway, we have that, we have some sensation. It's processed first in that sensory system before it ever gets to the amygdala, even with the psychological needs and things like that before we get to emotion. And that tells the mind that something bad is happening. Our scales are out of balance in that comparing place. And in order to survive, I have to anxiety, I have to seize, I have to inflame, whatever the physiological response was. In order to survive. Now, once again, that's a mistake by the mind. The anxiety was simply caused by the trauma that I went through, right? The seizure was caused by the physiologic or psychogenic trauma that I went through. The inflammation is caused by that trauma. It was just a cut or something like that, but still the body had some trauma there. It is caused by that. And then it had this response to it. Well, the brain made that mistake and said, you know what? I need to anxiety, I need to seize, I need to inflame because that helped me survive the first time and that'll help me survive this time, okay? So, excuse me, when we look at the creating place and these total behaviors and what have you, this concept of neuroception comes up, okay? Now, neuroception is an unconscious assessment, okay? Once again, the brain is always scanning. It's an assessment of safety or threat by the autonomic nervous system. And that leads to corresponding changes in the entire total behavior, right? Physiological, affective, behavioral responsive, cognitive responses as well. Now that response is first bottom up, then top down, okay? So bottom up, that's the triangle on the bottom, and then top down is the triangle on the top. So what happens is we have something's off, right? In the comparing place, something is off there. And that autonomic nervous system initiates the sympathetic nervous system. It says, fight, flight, or freeze, right? That's initiated. That goes up to the brain, and then the brain sends down a response with whatever that total behavior, that creative behavior happens to be. Seizing, anxiety, many different things when we look at mind-body disorders. That's what's going on. Now, when we talk about this total behavior that's being created, of course, in the model of the brain as a control system, that comes from that black box, the creating place. And what is that really? When we talk about the creating place, what are we really talking about? Well, we're not conscious of it. We're not conscious of creating these behaviors. So it has to have something to do with the unconscious, right? And if we're going to make changes in this, then we're going to have to access the unconscious in some way. And the way that I choose to do this is through hypnosis. So, another way, I'll be glad to hear of it. but is through hypnosis, right? Now, Freud was the first one to try to gain access to the unconscious through hypnosis. In hypnosis, your client has to trust you in order to follow what you do to create that hypnotic state. By all accounts, Freud was not a very trustworthy person. And so he gave up on hypnosis and developed psychoanalysis, right? Free association and what have you. But I've always liked it if we put hypnosis into the model of the brain as a control system. I think if we look at the total behavior car, hypnosis is a voice coming out of the radio, right? I go to a hypnotist, I sort of turn the radio on, and then I have a voice telling me to do these things. I don't have to do them. I can do them or not do them. And I sort of compare that to Waze. If you have that little app on your phone with Waze that tells you, it'll say in half a mile, take a left turn or whatever. I don't have to follow it. I'm usually better off if I do. But I don't have to follow it, but it's there. I have something coming in, a voice coming in, telling me what I need to do to steer my car to get to where I want to go. Okay, so through hypnosis, we're sort of doing the same thing. We're accessing the unconscious mind, and we're telling it to scan for those threatening sensations through neuroception or interoception. I'm using those terms synonymously here. And then we're telling it to shut down before it starts to manifest in a physical or psychological way. So we can use direct or indirect suggestions during hypnosis. We talk to that mind body, help it realize that it made a mistake, and that mistake needs to be corrected through beginning a physiological grounding process, followed by some cognitive behavioral skills for recovery. So we talk to that unconscious. I don't think it's a cognitive solution per se. I don't think we're really dealing with, in a way, we're dealing with the thinking wheel on the total behavior car. But neuroception is so connected to the physiological system. I think it's more that. I think in this neuroception, we identify changes in physiology at the unconscious level before it ever makes it to consciousness. And then what we want to do is immediately start this physiological grounding process. Rather than go through that fight, flight, and freeze response, we want to start to create something that's related to the parasympathetic nervous system instead of the sympathetic nervous system. So we can do certain things. We can begin diaphragmatic breathing. We can, that's usually what works. We talk a lot about breathing when we talk about this, and that's because diaphragmatic breathing stimulates the vagus nerve. And once the vagus nerve is stimulated, that kicks in the parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest system, and causes us to relax. There are sensors in the lungs that when we exhale tell us everything is okay. We have two vagus nerves. We have a dorsal vagal nerve that's connected to the sympathetic nervous system, over which we have no control. And then we have the ventral vagus, which is connected to the parasympathetic nervous system, which we can control through things like breathing. Okay. Some people have a lot of trouble breathing, and if it gets too far, if the physiological response gets too far, then they're not, it's already kicked in. So I have to dump the stress. So what do I do with this? I engage in some sort of strenuous physical exercise to get rid of that adrenaline, get rid of that cortisol. Spend 20 minutes running stairs, jumping rope, doing squat thrusts. I think those are called burpees these days. Anything that's going to be physical and it's going to burn off that adrenaline and cortisol. After about 20 minutes, I want to focus, sort of be mindful of the things that help me feel physically grounded and emotionally safe. Focus on the feeling of my feet on the floor, the feeling of my body in a chair, the feeling of the air coming in through the nostrils. Listen to some mid-range music, smile, be near people you trust, these sorts of things. And as we do that, we calm down that survival brain. We sort of put the control on the sympathetic nervous system, and we begin to feel safe at that point. So the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and that's what we want. As soon as we feel safe, that recovery process begins, and we can focus on other things. The diaphragmatic breathing, which was a part of what we just talked about. The mindfulness is a part of what we just talked about. EFT, tapping, we can use that to help us calm down. Guided or creative visualization, self-hypnosis, etc. So if you're asking me, do I need to know hypnosis in order to work with these things? I think it would be helpful. That's all I'm saying. Now, we've worked with these things without hypnosis, most certainly over the years through the model of the brain as a control system, focusing just on the psychological needs. But I think that we can also now start to look at many different things, PTSD included, when we start working with the survival need as well. Because once again, I think that's what's happened. I think there's a mistake in that the mind has made a mistake. That reflexive loop has kicked in between the survival need and what we're sensing outside of it through that process of neuroception. And that's what happens. We just start to initiate those responses, and we have to find a way to intervene on those. And one way is to access that creating place, which once again, I think is the unconscious mind. I mean, we're not conscious of these behaviors as they are created. So it's got to be the unconscious. And the only way I really know to access the unconscious in a helpful way that we can use with something like PTSD or non-epileptic seizures is to use hypnosis. Okay, that's where I am on this. That's what I have so far. So if anybody has any questions on this, if anybody has any comments on this, please let me know, because I want to try to figure this out more as I go forward. But this is where I am right now with it. So what do you think? I think I'm at my 20 minutes.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. Really, really, really neat. Why don't you go ahead and put the screen down so that we can see you and talk with you personally. And I absolutely love the fact that the R's that you have in parentheses, and that you talk about them being the little R and the big R, that it's what is really reality versus what we see as being our reality, and how that does affect. And as I was thinking about hearing all of this and in wonderful terms, it kept coming through my mind, the fact that pain serves us.
Mm-hmm.
It serves us either to heal or it serves us to deteriorate. Indeed, so yeah. The back loop, the re-reflection, can you go into that just a little bit more?
Well, if we look at that, the reflexive loop we know about, right, is that first one that connects really our belief system. And beliefs are things that are in our quality world, right? The way things should be. We have pictures, very clear pictures, the way things should be, the way things ought to be, and what have you. And so those get to be in our quality world. And we know through the work of Kuhn, through the work of Barker and many other people, that there is a reflexive loop between that and what we would call the value filter, right? Because based on our belief system, everything is not going to get through that value filter, right? It's only the things that meet our needs. It's only the things that we value. And that in turn is going to, once again, go back to the quality world and back to those psychological needs that are in the quality world. Like I said, if you watch that video, if you go to the link that I had there, and I can certainly make that available to everybody after this, but if you go to that link and you watch that, you see the card exercise that he does. And like I said, we know this because if something disagrees with our belief system, we will do one of three things. We will totally ignore it. Okay. I don't know what you're talking about. Didn't hear you say it. Okay. I don't know what you mean. Just ignore that information entirely. I will twist the information. This is what we usually do. Mm-hmm. I twist the information that I get until it meets what's the belief that's in my quality world. Or in extreme cases, physiologically, I'll be unable to perceive that. And that's really what the experiment shows. I'm saying the same thing goes on with the survival need and the sensory filter. So we're getting it right at the beginning through that process of neuroception, interoception. The body's always scanning. And once it scans that something's out of place, something's different, our scales are out of balance in some way, then it starts to kick in that response, which According to it, this is the mistake, right? This helped me survive. This anxiety helped me survive. This stress helped me survive. This inflammation helped me survive. Now, did it? No, but it was associated with whatever was going on at the time, which was my reality of the situation, right? And so it gets to be a picture in the quality world. So the next time it happens, what do? We jump to that picture, just like we're continually evaluating things based on, the pictures in our quality world. It works the same way for the survival need as it does for the psychological needs. And anytime something's off, and remember that this can happen even at it does happen at an unconscious level, that response starts to kick in. And usually by the time it kicks in, by the time somebody becomes consciously aware of it, what they're aware of is the anxiety. What they're aware of is the pain. What they're aware of is that they're in the middle of a seizure, et cetera, whatever it happens to be. So what we want to do is we want to catch it before it gets there. We want to catch it at the unconscious level, get the unconscious mind working for us so it catches it at that level and then sort of bypasses the sympathetic nervous system. So I don't go into that fight, flight, or freeze. I don't start seizuring or anxiety or what have you. And it sort of kicks us to the point where immediately I need to, my scales are out of balance. I need to do something that's calming. I need to do something that makes me feel safe instead of doing what I usually do.
So I have a question for you. So here we are with our filters. My hand here is being the filter. And with the filter, the valuing filter, and then we go into the perceived world. And there's 3 colors in that perceived world. And what do those 3 colors represent?
Yeah, well, one of them is the yellow. That goes into our quality world, right? That's the one the one they're talking about. The green is as I recall is sort of the total knowledge, right? We have a total knowledge filter that it gets through. That's just sort of neutral stuff that goes on.
The neutral stuff. And what's the red?
Yeah, and the red is the stuff that if I recall, you're testing me here, Mona.
Oh, sorry.
The red is the stuff that gets me into that negative control loop that I go through.
Okay.
It gets me what I want. We don't create any behavior. We don't do anything as a pattern of behavior that doesn't fulfill our needs. It doesn't have to be good for us, and that's what we have with addiction, and that's what we have with things like chronic regional pain syndrome, non-epileptic seizures, or anything else. So the body creates these things because it thinks it fulfills that survival need, when in fact it's not really. It's just was associated with it, so it made that mistake.
So my question is, here's the valuing filter, which is the first filter that it comes through.
Right.
To come into here. So is part of, and the valuing filter is going to come through the creative and it's going to come through the conscious and the unconscious mind both. So could one of those things that we filter through something that's red that we want to fight against?
This is where I think the mistake is. Okay. I think that what happens is that red thing, that's the seizuring, right? That's the anxiety, that's the inflaming, all of that stuff. We want to try to get rid of that. But if we approach it from looking at the psychological needs, I don't think we have real quick success in that. I think that eventually we can sort of get the brain to understand that it made a mistake there. But I think if we look at it from the survival need, and the survival need thinks that it's yellow. The survival need, it's made the mistake. It thinks it's in the other loop, right? It thinks it's in the positive control instead of the negative, right? So I think that's the mistake. It is indeed, we would put it in the red part, right? We would put it in the red and say, this is something harmful. But I think the brain, that's the mistake that the brain has made and said, no, this is something that I need to survive. So it gets to be in the quality world.
Yeah. Well, this is definitely thought-provoking and very good information. So thank you. So that black box of the mind, so we need to look at the errors that we're thinking.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's got into the the creative behavior we know comes from that black box of the mind, right? The creating place. We've always sort of called that the black box of the mind. So these total behaviors come from there, and that's where we want to catch it, and that's where we want to stop it and say, no, we need to create something else. We need to create relaxation and calmness. We don't need to create fight, flight, or freeze. We want to create the rest and digest stuff.
And the different ways to become more conscious. You were talking about hypnosis helping. What about dreams?
Dreams, well, if you can control your dreams, that would be good. I mean, dreams are often an indicator of what we're thinking about or what the body's doing or something like that, right? But I don't know that we have that. I mean, people talk about lucid dreaming and things like that. Possibly, I've never really looked at it from that, accessing what's going on in my I've never looked at trying to control my dreams to control outcomes in the I usually look at it
control it, but to get more information.
Oh yeah.
As to what your psychic is really trying to tell you.
Yeah. I think the brain does that. Of course, it has a lot of physiological functions, but it also, that's where that REM sleep, that dream sleep, is where we work out all the problems. In fact, that's what is, when we talk about something like PTSD, that's what's interrupted during that, right? So I have the trauma, I start to dream about the trauma, that wakes me up, so I don't get the REM sleep that I need. So the brain never resolves really what that issue is. And when I start to talk about it, even when I'm conscious, I have the same sort of problem. That's why things like EMDR works, right? So EMDR is a technique, that eye movement desensitization reprocessing process, that recreates the eye movement in dream sleep when I'm awake. And what that does is to allow me to calm down, and then I'm able to process and talk about it on a conscious level. But yes, yeah, I think dreams can be very, dreams are my, if I was to use the car analogy, dreams are the idiot lights on my car, right? It says, need oil, put oil in your car, you're out of gas, whatever. The dreams are sort of that sort of panel that says, this is what's going on inside. Even though we may not be able to, the unconscious deals in images, and what it means to the unconscious doesn't necessarily mean to us consciously. But sometimes we're very clear on what it means, I think. And in those cases, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you very, very much. And we're going to close the airways down. And those of you that are here live, we want to hear from you. So thank everyone for being here. And thank you, Ron, especially. This has been very enlightening. And so good mental health.